Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Jordan. When someone consistently refuses to claim you publicly, they're not protecting the relationship. They're protecting their options. I'd been with Kimberly for 3 years when she humiliated me in front of friends by laughing at the idea of introducing me to her parents. 3 years of patient waiting, of accepting excuses, of believing that love meant giving someone time to be ready. 3 years of being a secret while she apparently built a future with someone else. If you enjoy stories like this, take a moment to tap the like button and leave a comment on where you're watching from. Let's know ourselves. Now back to the story. We met when I was 26 and she was 23, both living in Seattle. I worked as a commercial pilot, mostly flying short regional routes around Washington and Oregon. She worked as a pediatric nurse at a nearby children's clinic. We met by chance at a concert and exchanged contacts. Within weeks of chatting, we discovered we had good chemistry. The early relationship felt promising. There were good conversations, physical attraction, and compatible interests. We started dating exclusively after about 2 months, both agreeing we wanted to see where this could go. I fell hard. Kimberly was beautiful, objectively stunning, in ways that made heads turn when we walked into a room together. She was intelligent, articulate, and had this confidence that drew people to her. I felt lucky that she'd chosen me to be her man. But there was always something slightly detached about her emotional availability, a distance I couldn't quite bridge initially. She'd be physically present but mentally somewhere else. She would engage in conversations, but rarely initiate deeper discussions about feelings or our future. I convinced myself that this was just her personality. Some people are naturally more reserved emotionally, and I needed to be patient and let her open up at her own pace. As our relationship progressed through the first year, I started making it clear that I wanted to build something lasting. I would casually mention that I could see a future with her and talk about long-term plans. What kind of life we want to have together. Kimberly never explicitly rejected these hints, but she never embraced them either. Instead, she would redirect the conversation. She might say things like, "Let's not rush things," or "We have plenty of time to figure that out later." I didn't push because I understood that people move at different speeds, and marriage is a significant commitment that requires her to be sure before committing herself. But as we approached 2 years together, I noticed a pattern that bothered me more and more. Kimberly had never introduced me to her parents or made any attempt to do that. I'd met some of her friends, though. We had been to a few group gatherings with her social circle. But her family remained entirely separate from our relationship. Every time I'd mention it, suggesting maybe we could visit her parents for a holiday or that they could come visit us in Seattle, she'd have excuses. According to her, her parents were complicated, and they had strong opinions about her life choices. She assured me that she'd introduce me when the time was right, when she felt ready, and when the circumstances were better. The excuses were always vague enough that I couldn't argue with them. Who was I to say her parents weren't complicated or that now was the right time if she didn't feel that way? So I accepted it, assuring myself that she'd come around eventually because she loves me, that her avoidance stemmed from fear of family pressure, not for me or our relationship. But the doubts were there even as I'd pushed down whenever they surfaced. I'd once mentioned these concerns to my co-pilot friend. He'd been skeptical of Kimberly from early in our relationship, though he'd tried to hide it initially. My friend would point out that 2 years was a long time to date someone seriously without meeting their parents, that her excuses didn't really add up, that maybe she wasn't as invested in our future as I was. Even though I was the one complaining, I defend Kimberly every time, playing devil's advocate and saying that everyone moves at their own pace, that her family dynamics were complicated in ways I didn't fully understand, that she was probably just taking things slow. My friend would drop it when I took that angle, but I could see his concern, his belief that I was making excuses for behavior that didn't deserve excusing. As we moved into year 3, I noticed other patterns that should have alarmed me more than they did. Kimberly would become distant for several days any time I brought up marriage or a serious commitment. She wouldn't be cold exactly, just withdrawn, less communicative. like she was pulling back emotionally until I stopped pushing in that direction. She rarely posted about me on social media. Over 3 years together, maybe a handful of photos. And even those were subtle group shots where I was barely visible, or photos captioned with vague references like good times or weekend fun, without mentioning me by name. When she did explicitly post about me, it was always as my friend rather than boyfriend or partner, as if she were deliberately keeping our relationship status ambiguous to anyone viewing her social media. I'd mention this occasionally, ask why she never posted our couple photos or referred to me as her boyfriend publicly. Kimberly would brush it off, saying she wasn't big on social media displays of relationships, that she preferred to keep her private life private. That constant posting about your partner was performative, and she wasn't interested in performing for strangers. The explanations sounded reasonable enough that I'd accept them, even though something felt off about dating someone for years who acted like our relationship was a secret to be protected rather than something to celebrate. My friend had also pointed this out bluntly once, said that Kimberly was keeping me hidden, that her behavior suggested she didn't want people to know we were together, that this was a red flag I was choosing to ignore. I defended her then, saying maybe she just valued privacy, that not everyone needed to broadcast their relationship publicly, that I was secure enough in what we had that I didn't need social media validation. But I wasn't secure. I was anxious inside. I constantly wonder why someone who claimed to care about me seems reluctant to publicly claim me. I didn't understand why, after 3 years, she hadn't introduced me to her family. I hated to admit that our relationship felt perpetually temporary despite the time we'd invested. Things between us had been particularly distant in the weeks leading up to the incident that ended everything. Kimberly had been less available, more distracted when we were together, and less interested in making plans. I suggested a weekend hangout with some of our close friends. Thought maybe spending time in a casual social setting would help us reconnect. Getting out of our routine might remind us why we worked together. Kimberly agreed somewhat reluctantly, said she'd come for a few hours. The gathering was at another friend's big apartment on a Saturday afternoon. About 15 people, including Kimberly's best friend, were there. Some came with their partners. It was a casual atmosphere with drinks and snacks and good conversation. We arrived about an hour after the agreed-upon time. We'd been there 2 hours when the conversation turned to relationships and plans. One of my friends was teasing another couple about when they would get engaged. The couple had been together about 18 months and had recently moved in together. The attention shifted naturally to Kimberly and me. Someone pointed out we'd been together even longer. What was it, 3 years now? Asked when I was planning to propose. The tone was light and friendly, usual teasing among friends who know each other well. I smiled and responded honestly but playfully. Said I'd propose when Kimberly was ready, that she hadn't taken me to meet her parents yet, so we weren't quite at the engagement stage. It was a sincere comment, not accusatory or bitter, just acknowledging the reality that we hadn't reached certain relationship milestones that typically precede engagement. The response I expected was some light embarrassment from Kimberly or a redirection of the conversation away from our relationship timeline. What I didn't expect was what actually happened. Kimberly laughed, and then she said clearly, for everyone to hear, "You really think I'd ever introduce you to my parents?" The room went silent immediately. I felt the humiliation wash over me in waves. This woman I'd loved for 3 years, whom I'd been patient with, and defended to friends who had concerns, had just publicly mocked the idea of claiming me as someone significant enough to introduce to her family. My smile faded slowly as I felt my face getting hot. I looked at Kimberly, trying to understand if she'd meant it the way it sounded, or if this was some terribly misjudged joke. Her expression told me she'd meant exactly what she'd said. No apology in her eyes. No recognition that she'd just humiliated me in front of my closest friends. For some seconds, I processed the implications of what had just happened. Then I told her simply, "Don't worry. You won't have to introduce me to your family any longer." Then stood up, thanked everyone for having me, and walked out of the apartment without looking back. I got in my car and drove home in a daze. It felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, as if this whole thing were happening to someone else. For the rest of that evening, I sat in my apartment just processing everything. 3 years of accepting excuses and believing they were about her family dynamics rather than about me. 3 years of being patient while apparently being kept as an option rather than chosen as a priority. My phone has been buzzing since I left. These were messages from Kimberly. Initially, I read them without opening them so she wouldn't see the read receipts. At one point, I muted the phone because the buzzing sound was annoying me. The messages she sent were dismissive rather than apologetic. She was asking if I was seriously mad about her response, saying I was overreacting, that it had been a joke that I was taking too seriously. There was no acknowledgement that what she'd said was cruel. No recognition that publicly mocking your partner in front of their friends crosses fundamental relationship boundaries. I didn't respond. Then a new message came through from Kimberly's best friend Jenna, who'd been at the gathering. The message started cautiously, apologizing for what had happened, saying I didn't deserve that I'd always treated Kimberly better than she admitted. Jenna said I should know that Kimberly had been seeing someone else, that she'd been serious about him, that they'd been talking about marriage. Kimberly said he was the one she wanted, and that she would take him home to her parents during the holidays. I read the message, feeling waves of pain. Everything made sense suddenly. All the pieces I'd been trying to force into a picture of a relationship that was just moving slowly clicked into a picture entirely different. Kimberly hadn't been moving slowly. She'd been keeping me as a backup while pursuing something serious with someone else. Someone she apparently had no hesitation in introducing to her family. Someone she could envision a future with, while I waited patiently for scraps of commitment. The detachment I'd noticed wasn't her personality. It was her emotional investment being directed elsewhere. The excuses about her complicated family weren't real. She just didn't want to introduce me to them, because I wasn't the person she was building a future with. The secrecy around social media made perfect sense. She couldn't post openly about me as her boyfriend, because she was involved with someone else who might see those posts. The distance whenever I'd mention marriage or serious commitment wasn't fear. She knew our relationship was temporary for her, even if I didn't. I sat there feeling this bizarre sense of devastation at the betrayal and the 3 years I'd invested in someone who'd been deceiving me. At least, I finally had answers to questions I'd been asking for years. I went through our relationship in my mind, identified all the moments where I'd made excuses for concerning behavior, where I'd chosen to believe her explanations rather than trust my instincts, and where I'd prioritized patience and understanding over recognizing patterns that should have alarmed me. I'd told myself that patience was love, that giving someone time and space to be ready was what a good partner did. But patience had just given Kimberly more time to betray me, more time to keep me as her secondary option while she built something primary with someone else. That night, I blocked Kimberly's number, deleted her contact information, went through my phone and removed photos of us together, unfollowed her on social media, cut off all the digital connections that had tied us together. I didn't do it out of anger, exactly, more out of necessity. I knew that maintaining any connection would just prolong the pain that needed to end cleanly. I spoke to my best friend to tell him that he was right about Kimberly. He asked if I was okay. I honestly told him I wasn't, but that I would be, that I'd gotten confirmation of what he'd been trying to tell me for years, that Kimberly wasn't invested in our relationship the way I was. My friend said he was sorry, that he'd hoped he was wrong about his concerns, that he'd wanted to be proven paranoid rather than proven right. We talked for over an hour about the relationship, about the signs I'd missed or ignored, about how to move forward. My friend, being the friend he'd always been, supportive without saying I told you so, even though he easily could have. The next morning, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I answered without thinking. Kimberly's voice. She'd apparently called from someone else's phone or gotten a new number specifically to reach me after realizing I'd blocked her. She tried to downplay what had happened by saying it had been a joke that came out wrong, that she hadn't meant it the way it sounded, that I was overreacting by blocking her and cutting off communication. The gaslighting was almost impressive. After 3 years of keeping me separate from her family, after publicly humiliating me, after apparently carrying on a whole separate serious relationship, she was trying to convince me I was the problem for being hurt. I told her calmly that we were over, that the relationship was done, that I wasn't interested in hearing explanations or excuses. Kimberly tried to act surprised, asked why I was being so dramatic, said every relationship has rough patches, and we could work through this. I told her I knew about her side affair. The silence that followed was confirmation. If there had been nothing going on, she'd have denied it immediately, asked what I was talking about, and demanded to know who'd told me lies about her. Instead, she went completely silent, the guilty silence of someone who's been caught. After several seconds, she started trying to explain, to justify or minimize. I didn't let her get far. I asked her not to contact me again, told her I wished her well and that I hoped she and the person she could actually take home to her parents would be happy together. Then I ended the call and blocked that number too. After ending the call, I felt this strange mixture of emotions. Hurt because I genuinely loved her. Betrayed because she'd been lying for who knows how long. Relieved because I was finally free from a relationship that had been slowly destroying my self-worth. Mostly I felt stupid. Stupid for ignoring all the signs. Foolish to make excuses when friends had expressed concerns. Stupid for believing that patience and understanding would be rewarded with eventual commitment. But I also felt determined. Determined to heal from this. Determined to learn from it. Determined never again to accept being someone's secret or someone's second choice. The days immediately following were difficult. I would wake up and instinctively reach for my phone to text her, only to remember we were done. I would think of things I wanted to share with her before catching myself. 3 years of habit and routine don't disappear immediately just because the relationship ends. Weeks after the breakup, I learned more details through mutual friends. Kimberly had apparently been seeing the other guy for over a year. Apparently, he knew about me. Knew she had a boyfriend she'd been with for years. He was fine with being the affair partner because Kimberly had told him she was planning to end things with me soon. She just hadn't found the right time. The level of deception was staggering. Not just cheating, but maintaining 2 full relationships simultaneously. Not just keeping me separate from her family, but apparently introducing her affair partner to them while I waited patiently to meet them someday. I could have been angry, but I didn't. I just let it go. Let her live with whatever consequences came from her choices without my involvement. Because ultimately, she hadn't just betrayed me. She'd revealed who she fundamentally was. Someone capable of sustained deception. Someone who viewed relationships transactionally and strategically. Someone who kept options open rather than committing genuinely. That person wasn't worth my anger or my energy. Spent the following months focused on healing and rebuilding. Went to therapy to process the betrayal and understand why I'd ignored obvious warning signs. Gradually, the pain faded. Not entirely. Betrayal leaves scars even after healing. But the acute devastation gave way to dull acceptance and eventually to grateful recognition that I dodged something much worse. Because if Kimberly had actually been willing to marry me, I'd have spent years or decades married to someone fundamentally dishonest. Would have built a life with someone capable of maintaining elaborate deceptions. I would have invested even more time before discovering her true character. Instead, I got out after 3 years. Before marriage, before children, before financial entanglement. With nothing but wasted time and wounded pride as the cost. It could have been so much worse. After everything, here are some of the things I learned from the entire situation. I learned that when someone consistently refuses to publicly claim you, they're revealing exactly how they see you. Kimberly had kept me separate because I wasn't part of her real future. I was just someone occupying time until she found or committed to what she actually wanted. I learned that patience without reciprocity is just enabling disrespect. My willingness to wait patiently for a commitment Kimberly never intended to give didn't make me a good partner. It made me someone she could take advantage of while pursuing what she actually wanted elsewhere. I learned that excuses that continue for years aren't legitimate obstacles. They're deliberate barriers someone maintains because they don't want you integrated into their real life. Kimberly's complicated family wasn't the problem. Her not wanting me to meet them was. I learned that social media behavior reveals priorities. Kimberly's refusal to post about me openly wasn't about privacy. It was about keeping her options open and maintaining separate narratives for different audiences. Most importantly, I learned that public humiliation from someone who claims to love you is actually a gift, because it forces clarity you might otherwise avoid indefinitely. Kimberly mocking me in front of my friends was devastating in the moment. But it also ended years of self-deception and freed me to find something real. Because I finally learned, patience is only a virtue when both people value it. Otherwise, it's just permission to be disrespected indefinitely. And I'm done giving anyone permission to disrespect me, done waiting to be chosen, and done accepting being someone's secret. I'm choosing myself now, choosing people who choose me, and choosing relationships where I'm valued openly rather than kept hidden. And that's the best choice I could make.